Oya, da lujungi tangbo kyobadi chutsabache. Da dirin karsana niba kyobali deshi chutsuni is.
In the forward process, after having done Sugata yesterday, today is the third one, which is from Sugata, proving teacher. Sorry, from protected Sugata. Sorry, we've done protected. Now from protected Sugata.
Oh yeah. Atsawa kyobli dini tembatang malu kebar kembardu. Shema tobe tenchirde tishirchiro patalo milub lela teachers.
From protector realizing from protector realizing reality, stable realization and complete realization of all aspects is established. Because Sugata has the meaning of realizing, it is superior to outsiders, learners and no more learners.
Oh, this is. Ta kyoble sidu kyoba tasu tela kyoba tasu ni tele kari dugu yoresana ani tomba shaje tulagi kyula ani khebar sumdingi tobo deshi yoba to dugu yore ta thanda de tobo deshi slavyendu dewar shakwa se di ani namgyu deshi ni le gyamshe chigdi dewar shakwa se di pangwa deshi la she deshi chigdi tobo deshi la she ta thanda de lukjungi kabla deshi di tobo deshi shegire lukdo di kabla deshi di pangwa deshi shegire.
So from protector, citing protector as the reason, then what we're establishing is Sugata, that the Buddha has the quality of being Sugata. Sugata in English I think is as one gone beyond, the one who has gone beyond. And when you say Sugata, there's two versions of Sugata, or it's understood in two ways. One is in terms of the realization, and Sugata in terms of abandonment, of what has been abandoned and what has been realized. Of the two, we're in the reverse process. In the reverse process, the Sugata that we're establishing through the sign protector refers to the realization part of Sugata. So Sugata as a realization, or that realization that has gone beyond.
Deshe. Ta dendegi tobo deshe sedi ingyu karili segor sedu sangi tomba shajo tugyu ki ani kemba del segor.
So this realization that has gone beyond, so the Sugata is the gone beyond part of it, right? The one who's gone beyond. And when you're talking about two aspects, one is a realization that has gone beyond, and an abandonment that has gone beyond. Here it's the realization that has gone beyond. And the realization that has gone beyond here refers to the wisdom of the Buddha, or to the wisdom mind of the Buddha.
Ta dendegi tobo deshe dela kecho khande yoresne kecho sum shigi yoba yidu kebar sumdingi tobo deshe eslam.
So this realization of the Buddha, or this realization that is the Sugata, that is a realization, has three qualities. So from protector, we're proving a realization that has gone beyond, that has three qualities.
Ta disum di kare reslana tekona ni kemba temba malubar kemba ase kemba kecho sumburi tire.
So the three qualities are, in the verse it says, realizing reality, a stable realization, and a complete realization.
Di indu zawa nalola dini tang, kyoble dini tang ten tang sidu, dini sidu tekuna ni kemba, ten tang sidu, kemba temba, malu kebar chub sijita, di indu kyobe tala tenne, and kebar sumdegi toba deshi chub.
So that's what the meaning of these first two lines, which is from protector, which is the reason. And then we're proving the predicate, that is the realization that has gone beyond. And the realization has three characteristics, or three qualities. One is that it is a realization of reality. that it is stable, and that is complete. So from protector, these three aspects of the realization that has gone beyond are being established.
Yeah. That digi tensi ma ko yo de tensi khande de se de deva na yo le shin che. Denshi sungo bo de ba shaje tu bo che jin che. Che jin de la denshi ma sung si be ani digi denshi tön digi de ba shaje tu bo che jin. Kebar sumding gi to ba de shi nga wa yin des. Ta nga wa yin de se de kebar sumding gi to ba de shi gyule yo res. Yo ba yin de nga wa yin de chowa tenye la denbashi nilu chinchi maloba dönbe gyoba yinbe yeshe su ta gyoba tasu kene di tukyu la kebar sumdegi toga deshe yukdi to ustru.
So the reason or the way the syllogism is structured is take the subject, the teacher of the Four Truths, Shakyamuni Buddha. He is Sugata, that has the three qualities of realization, because he is the protector who unmistakably teaches the nature of the Four Truths to those who wish for liberation.
Oh yeah. 다 tensi di nganzo lo chut sabre kasa nganzo gyoba korda sangma tsimba yindu chowa dungi na deshi nilu chinchi maloba dönbe gyoba yinbe sisi nganzo chokji do chut sabche.
So the property of the subject we've already proven, because before this, when we were talking about protector, that was already established earlier. So now the property of the subject is something that we've already discussed and we've already proven.
다 gyoble dini khenpa su chidar chubje na 다 kyaba khadis chubres. Gyoble dini khenpa su chidar chubje na.
With respect to the pervasion, how does one establish the realization of reality and so on from protector?
다 디기 렌텔라 랑니 이 다메 무슨도 시바 메나 셴라 디니 코와르 트레베 람파베 뎀보 셰 템버 리뉴베 데코나니 케버토.
Without someone having themselves directly seen reality, they will not be able to tell others, this is the noble truth of the path that leads to freedom from samsara.
So that chomde degi demba shi song yode dini dungye phagbe demba dini guju phagbe dini lam phagbe demba sebi ani dila shusa di dame musum to sherat che dende di ani siba de tuje gi lam re se dini lam phagbe demba o se ta korangi lomala dujala chöde demba wa so di inde ani chomde de korangi kede dame musum de kemena an dame musum de kemba di lamdi ani lamphabe demba res dini lamphabe demba o se ani sung tuya yo mares indi chomne digi dini lamphabe demba o se sung shaba digi khari chugi yore chomne digi tuju la dame musum de siba yo de kemba yo de chugi yore indi keju sumi nane tangbo dekona ni kemba se yo de chugi.
So when the Buddha taught the Four Truths, when the Buddha said this is the truth of the path, the this that he referred to, or what he refers to when he says this is the truth of the path, is a direct realization of no self or selflessness. And for someone to be able to say this is the direct, or this is the truth of the path, referring for the Buddha to say that, and for that to be referring to a direct realization of selflessness, unless the Buddha themselves or the Buddha himself had not seen reality directly, he would not be able to accurately tell others that this is the truth of the path that leads to freedom from suffering. So because the Buddha unmistakably tells or teaches that the direct realization of selflessness is the truth of the path, from this we establish that the Buddha would have had to realize or have this realization himself. And so the first of these three qualities, which is the realization of reality, that can be established from the fact that the Buddha said this is the truth of the path that leads to freedom from suffering, which is the aspect of realizing reality. So the realization, the first part of it, realizing reality, is established through the fact that the Buddha said this is the truth of the path.
다 대본은 이 캠바도 춥소마 다 캠바 때문에 간지 추기래 라나 랑니기 냥대원도 마체나 듄니 두미 여시베 고고파베 뎀바오 시 템버 미뉴베 캠바 템버 춥.
How does that then prove the next aspect, which is a stable realization. Without someone having actualized nirvana themselves, they will not be able to tell others, this is the truth of cessation, that is the pacification of all suffering and its causes. So the fact that the Buddha says this is the complete cessation of suffering and all of its causes, the Buddhas themselves have to have attained that state to be able to accurately say that this is the truth of cessation.
Teacher. 다 딜라 캠바 템바스 칸디스 라비요르스라나 캠바 템바스에 봐 니랑 파바 니랑 로바 파바 딱한데 다저도 고봉마도 로고 파바기 줄라 고딘 요르데 고고모도 제요르데 냥딩모도 제주로 다저도 고봉마토게보도 냥딩모도 제요 마와 소저 다저도 고봉마토게 파도 땡기 강사디 다동양 코발 제고고요 봐 코발 제고고 요바인디 tēnā kēmbā tēmbā sīkī yō mō rē. Tā nyāngdēng mō tō chē sāwē jēgī dāmē tō bē shirab tī, tā tū nāmgī tsēyāng, kāzāng lāwa nā shēn shī chī dāmē tō bē shirab tī, kā tū nō mō tō kyū kyū bā, sikē chē shē tē bā yīndī kēmbā tēmbā sēt kē shī gō rē. Sō tō kēmbā tēmbā tī kā tū yōng gō rē sā tū, nyāngdēng mō tō chē sāwē jē rā yōng gō rā wā, nyāngdēng mō tō chē sīmbā jē rā kēmbā tēmbā tī yōng gō yō rā wā. Tī yīndī tā, tēmbā shē tū bā khorāngi nyāngdēng mō tō chē mē na, dīni gō gō khō bē tēmbā wō sē chī tā, sōng tū mā rē. 이네 좀 되게 되는 거 덴바고 송바 디기 가리 투바래라나 코랑이 주는 양딩모도 제심부터 투바래 양딩모도 제심부터 투바인데 아니 코랑이 투주 캠바디 대코나니 캠바디 대코나니 캠바 zam마인데 캠바 때마인데 투바래 그래서 그렇습니다.
When the Buddha is being, it's like here the reason is being given for saying that the realization of the Buddha is stable. Here, stable, just so that we make a distinction, that Aryas who are still learners, they're still on the path, from the path of seeing onwards, which is when they become Arya beings, they have cessation, they have the truth of cessation, which means that they have some aspect of the truth of cessation. But the cessation that they have is not yet liberation, is not the cessation that is nirvana. And so, even though they may have realized cessation, their cessation is still not stable because it's not the complete removal of suffering and all of its causes. The realization of the Buddhas, because they have actualized or they have attained nirvana, which means, if you remember, that their realization of selflessness is unwavering and continuous. It's an uninterrupted realization of selflessness. That's why the Buddhas have attained stable realization. And so we say a stable realization is one after one is on the path of no more learning, where you have attained cessation that is nirvana and not just cessation. And so by distinguishing himself from those who are still on the path but have attained the path truth of cessation, the Buddhas, when their realization is inseparable from a mind that is realizing selflessness, they attain a stable form of realization. And so without themselves having attained such a state, telling others accurately that this is the state that is the truth of cessation, that is the pacification of all suffering and its causes, would not be possible. But because the Buddhas do teach the cessation of suffering and all of its causes, this is used to prove that they themselves have to have attained that, which is why their realization, unlike the learners, is stable.
단단하도 남의 주변에 수송기 집어 꿰체 남의 때는 파면도 아니 수송기 딱이 남의 루저 주변도 남의도 비시를 가지고 귤 깨지 다 남의도 비시를 귤 깨요르데 이 남의 무슨 도주로 와 뒤인데다 된대게 남의도 비시를 검제 양아도 맞아도 컴바이나 타르 남의 무슨 또남귤 깨롱이 와 지도 단다 귤을 믿어 와 타르 고래도 와귤 깨롱이 뭐 줬어 다 된대게 남의 무슨 또 남도 귤을 깨서나 되게 안에 당보 동반이 뭐 봐야 되니 림기 고마니 뭐 봐야 도 스케줄 쉐인데 간주 키시 미식 땡고 정바이나 테니 이세 디니 람파비 덴바오 세 sabla 테니 된대기 담에 무슨 또 통람다 담에 무슨 또 관람 테니 가래래. 람파비 덴바오 두스테야마도 디니 세케제 디시사라. 다 수수 귤라 담에 무슨도 또하세. 수수 귤라 담에 무슨도 또소나 디기 토마니 모두 스방도디 아니 디니 람파비 덴바오 뛰어도. 소다 좀된 디기 텐 람파비 덴바오 뛰어요 말이 디니 람파비 덴바오 덴바이디 코랑이 귤라 담에 무슨 또 담에 대코나니 팀이 캠버 유어바디다 두스트 말이다.
So when we can prove selflessness with reason, with the correct science, and we first, for the first moment, have a realization of selflessness through the three modes, at that point we have an inferential understanding of selflessness, but we know that that is not direct yet. And so when, through that reasoning of when that is familiarized, it can become, when it is cultivated and it is familiarized, then it can become a direct realization of selflessness. When we say that, we are talking about something that is still to come, it's still distant for us. And so if we were to tell someone that that is the truth of the path, the way we would describe it is not the way the Buddha described it, which is we would say that is the truth of the path. Because it's still something that we have to attain, we don't have it yet. For the Buddha to be able, for someone who has directly realized selflessness, when they have direct realization of selflessness, at that point they have abandoned what are known as the abandonments related to the path of seeing. And so for that person, for the first time, they have acquired or they have attained the first truth of cessation. And so when that person has attained this truth of cessation, they can say this, pointing to what they have, and say this is the truth of the path. But because they still haven't attained complete cessation of suffering, if they also were to describe what the path is that removes all suffering, they would still have to say that is the truth of the path. The Buddha, unlike that, does not refer to the path as something that is to be attained later, but while having attained it and resting in it and possessing that quality, then that's why the Buddha says this is the truth of cessation that has removed the root of all suffering, which is why then when the Buddha says this is the truth of suffering, this is the truth of cessation, that is the removal of suffering in all of its causes, it shows that the Buddha himself has attained that state in terms of how he's referring to it.
Dikswa, lamdin dikswa. 다 디나 신체제 가장 가서 고든 주비지 바꿔야 봐. 고든 주비지 바꿔면 신체제 풍부디 추정을 샤체. 풍부디 세론인데 다나 리뉴이 샤원도 그 풍부디 마 세론인데 아니 디 귤을 니지기 것도 되게 리과 디기 토네 아니 고봉원도 세론이 맞죠. 고봉원도 세론이 맞죠인데 다 텐데를 고바디스. 텐다와디 텐데베다 동해시로 고바디 아니 디레샤스다 디니 고고하면 된바 테니 고고하면 된바 오세지다야 대다자래 마도 디스 라베라니도 와다 좀된 얘기 디니 다 고고하면 된바 오세유디 두근 녀버 용수 저거 시와 디니 고고하면 된바 오슬라유디 좀된 얘기 마음 먹는 시주 테스 말아봐지 담아고도 체셈바 텔라 디스 라비 요바이디 냥데고도 셰셈바디 땡기요다 디 두고 요바이디 아니 캠바 땡바 와세 어디 레버다.
The same way one can talk about the Buddha not referring to the path as something distant that is to be attained by saying that is the truth of the path. The same applies also for cessation, where one starts by proving that cessation, liberation exists because the causes of liberation have a strong, the causes of suffering have a strong antidote. And so by proving this, we prove that liberation is possible. When we prove liberation is possible, we're not proving that we have liberation. One proves that liberation can be attained at some future state. And so again there we would say that is the truth of cessation. The Buddha over here in the way he teaches the truth, the four truths, when he teaches the truth of cessation again, he says this is the truth of cessation, suggesting that he himself is sitting in a realization of what the absence of, or what the separation from suffering and its causes looks like, or what it is, and therefore that's why even with relation to cessation and to the path, when the Buddha says this is the truth of cessation, that is freedom from suffering, like with the path, the Buddha is saying that him saying this is evidence that the Buddha himself has attained it, which is how then through the path and through cessation, and the fact that the Buddha says this is the truth of cessation, we say that the Buddha has stable realization, because he's talking about something that he himself has, and he's saying this is the one that's going to do it.
다 캠바 템바세 고와디 땡기 슈브네 신세 로바호 다 캠바 템바스도 냥데 온도 마치베 갑기 안에 파고하기 규기 다음에 또베 로드죠 대고는 이 캠바레디 캠바 템바 말에 다 템바 말에 세디 코 냐메 예비 기저시기요 말에 고 간조 템보요 말에 냠루 그리세 기저시기요 디기제 치기요 말에 다다 대고는 이 캠바 템바스라이디 로바 파비기 다음에 갑갑로 또 갑갑로 마토베요 그래서 대고는 또 백갑 마도 백갑 이거 뒤에다 뒤에 그 가도는 또도만 멤버인데 딘디기 차네 대고는 이 캠버 때문에 말해 다 다저도 고봉모도 재생이 양대모도 재생이 가사기 뒤에 대고는 이 캠버디 가도는 대고는 또도만 마도 딘디 대고는 마도 백갑으로 매고 송자 대고는 이 캠버 때문에 캠버 때문에 어디 두시냐 뭐
So the meaning of stable is a stable realization is distinguishing it from the realization of the learners. And the learners are those who have attained the truth of the path and the truth of cessation, but not a complete realization of that. Which is not to say that whatever realization they have is something that can then be reversed, or that it can degenerate or weaken and revert back to a previous state. That's not what stable is saying when we're saying that the Buddha's realization is stable. And so stable realization here simply distinguishes it from realizations that are the so-called unstable realizations, that are those of beings who are Arya beings from the path of seeing to the path of no more learning, because their realization of selflessness is not uninterrupted, it's not consistent, it's not stable. Because in certain moments they have it and in other moments they no longer do. And so the stability, or the aspect of stability of the Buddha's realization, is distinguishing it from those that are not uninterrupted, constant realizations of selflessness. And so stability and non-stability does not have a connotation of something that can return to a previous state. It just means whether it is uninterrupted or not.
Dice, ta maluba kemba di kadis tugudes lana, kowe ne rere tangs, tedala yobi dungin, teri penchegi leda, nyamo rere ne rangi usum du singni, dini dungil pabe demba tang, dini unjum pabe demba ooshe, tembar minube maluba kemba trubos.
So then the next one, which is complete realization of all aspects. In the text it is, without having oneself directly seen the different states of samsara, the suffering that exists in each one, and the different kinds of afflictions and karmas that project beings into each of these states, they will not be able to tell others, this is the noble truth of suffering, this is the noble truth of causes. So through this, it being the Buddha's realization, being a complete realization of all aspects, is established.
So that tanda pena ngaransu tanda pungbu di susu gi pungbu yedu susu pungbu di susu le de nyemong susu gyule nyemong yume da susu le sa gi yume da dezu ranglo ko du ma gyu ba di susu pungbu di dungi yimba di ngazu dub le la wa ta mi shimba ji gi pungbu di dungi de ma yimba dub shos la na ani kansa de tengi kansa di le de nyemong gi shawa ji yin de me de gi pungbu di kan dungi de ma yin de me se di For
instance, with us, in our case, our ability to prove that or understand that our aggregates are the nature of suffering or our suffering is easy. But despite our ability to understand our aggregates to be suffering, if one was to try and prove that someone else's aggregates are also suffering or they're the nature of suffering, it's not going to be easy to prove that or to be able to show that other people's aggregates are also the nature of suffering. That if someone else is the nature of suffering, you don't really find any kind of very satisfying reason to be able to prove that someone else's aggregates are suffering.
That ananganzo dekamba yende ngaranzo shebadi debe sempwa. Ta kam gomagi pungbo Sugla and something when you were super, she was for the shake. Didn't Sumegi Pungo, Sumela Nangata and Namshi Jane, Sisi, Tipa do Rene, Dunga de Bayabadi, Kadishetu. So the Mazu Kadishetu was no Mazu, she was no Kaburu. So that the Chumdin Digi, Dobeshaja Tubagi, Tiri in Wood Church. Deve Semni, come Sem Woodship, something Tongo Sem Woodship, Wood Chain, did Dunga de Bayabatu. Dini Yangja Yashi, something Yiba, Dini Sumbachi, Shibachi, Dijalan, Sumela Boy, Nagatai, Najatai, GM, Tatango Korangi, Logan Tango Dizar change. Namshit Haigi Pado, Lamdi Pumbudimo de Chene, Gomjan Pumbudimo de Chene, did Dunga Siege and Konga Shuji, Tatadon di Trova Remido, Tarba Remido Sidu, Ngala Dila DMS, and Karashambaza Dukes and Hajuzachi. And then Haju Sizigi Pargi Torangi Lamdi, D Moduche Savage, Dian Tabu Dunga de Mareshas. Tela Tatu Koyu Seba Tarun de Gigi, D Kunjun de Mareshas, Sage Tadon Choto Minus Kajish and Korangi, Tangal Dimo to Lambes. And Takara Susu Lams have a toshos, and it didn't much chimor. So the D in Corbe near Rene, Rangi, Dunga de Musum to see. Tadagi Sheba Rerenis, Tadagi any Debe. Come to that Sheba Rerin Modu Shage, Tadon Tella, and led the Yamungi Shamaji, Kunju, led the Yamungi Shamaji, but Tadala Layo, Yamoyo, Yamon Kiyo, to the Sama Tadon Kunju de Soma, Susu Musum, the Zigne, and it didn't Dunga with them all, didn't Kunju with them all, Sage, a Kovene, Yonsuzoma, and Dunga de Bada, Tadagi Gu, Penji led the Yamon de Kunju de Baratuna, what did did that didn't Maluba Kemba di Suzuki Maluba Kematuna, Shambala didn't do Mama, or Dean this way.
The last one, which is this one that we're doing, which is complete realization of all aspects. The way this is being, how we prove this is, for instance, if you consider your own state, our state, we are in the so-called desire realm, and we have our own kind of unique qualities or characteristics that we can identify as features that are still the truth of suffering, or they are still the truth of causes because they have their own kind of distinct traits that we can identify as being both suffering and the truth of causes. But if we were to try and say the form realm or other states in the desire realm or other ways of being that are different from ours are the nature of suffering, our ability to be able to understand that or explain that is entirely compromised by the fact that we don't really know it. Whereas if you look at how the Buddha speaks of the Four Truths or how he identifies the truth of causes and the truth of suffering, he gives explanations or he is describing the characteristics that are not only restricted to one realm, but he's talking about all the different faults, the specific and the general faults that are pertinent to each realm. So there is the four form realms, and for each one the Buddha says, these are those qualities, this is the truth of suffering. These are those qualities, this is the truth of causes. And he does this for each one of those, then he does it for all of the four realms that are the formless realms. And even in the life of the Buddha, if we read, there is a moment when he approaches a teacher and this teacher gives him instructions on how to cultivate the concentration that is known as endless space or limitless space. After the Buddha attains that, realizes that state, he still sees within that state that it still has causes for suffering. He sees that there is still some level of craving, there is still some level of suffering. And so he asks his teacher, he says, this is not liberation. And his teacher says, that's all I know. Go and seek somewhere else from someone else, another path. And then the Buddha goes to another teacher who then gives him the instructions to be able to cultivate the last concentration, which is the one of the peak of existence. And over there, then the Buddha cultivates that, attains it. Again, seeing it, after having realized it, he still sees that there are still causes for suffering, and that's not liberation. And then again, when he requests his teacher and says, this is not suffering, it still has causes, it still is the nature of suffering, this is not liberation. His teacher says, that's all I have. now go and seek another answer for yourself. And so then when the Buddha embarks on this journey, after he attains his realization, the way he describes the truth of causes and the truth of suffering is with so much detail that is specific to each one of the various realms, each one of the various states that one takes, that to be able to do that, unless the Buddha himself had realized and had actualized all of those and had experienced them, he would not be able to give that level of detail. Again, it would be, that is the truth of causes. Again, the Buddha, when he says, this is the truth of causes, this is the truth of suffering, and he does it with that level of detail, this establishes that the Buddha himself has a complete realization of all of these states and why they are all the nature of suffering and why they are causes.
So that ngara zu mi ten chen che da tunjo ma zu musum tong to go wa da yida da nyewa ma zu tong to go yo ma re de ba sa ya ma zu da tong to go yo ma wa ani da na shin da su do su me da de we ge ma tong to go yo ma wa di ni da du sa ma ngang zo la tan da shin du go ju cha de wa shin du go ju cha de ba yin ju da ngang zo ta da de ma sang gi ji su tang de khang sa ji gi da khor we gi ne de pas ngale de khor we gi ne de 도와줄 툴로 파도 스케줄 시에다 이와 시에지마 이시시 거와 다디 이시시 네 셴바 코르베네 도와 코르베네 될 릭투 요바 릭수수 민다고 투 요바 아니 네 대달라 두년 카리카리 요바디 땅아주 상기 좀 셔져 두베기 코랑기 카리 숭샤바 될라 먼저 이시시 두고 요바
We currently were humans, and in the human state we can see animals, so we can kind of vaguely guess or gauge what the animal state might be like. But then the other states that are spoken of, such as hungry ghosts or hell beings or devas, the gods or the asuras, and then the ones that are form and formless, for us they're unknown. So we know that for us those are extremely hidden phenomena. There's no way for us to know them. But if we are to cultivate and practice and reflect on the faults of samsara with all of its detail, then bringing to mind the faults that are associated with these 6 states of samsara, as followers of the Buddha, we also should know that the only way that we can cultivate or we can reflect on the qualities of these various states is solely by having faith in what the Buddha has said and how he has described them, because personally to us, those are extremely hidden.
그래서 다 디인도 다 또 상기 송로 제수 당내 가지고 이시시도도 딘디기 다 가지고 이시시로 되면 이거도 이시제 봤을 거예요. 소 이시제 봐인도 이시제 봐기 금진 디 가르고 요르세도 아니 상기기 딘디 숭샤 남샤텔라 아니 상기기 숭샤 딘디 남샤 숭샤 룽텔라 아니 네바민도 간다 제바 숭기 답이 룽레샤 세지다 딘디 룽디 제바 숭기 답이 윤제도 신이 killing.
When we have this, when we say we have faith in the teachings of the Buddha, that mind that has faith, if you remember, did we do that? It is inference based on faith. There's different kinds of inference. There's one inference that's inference based on faith and or belief. And so the mind that cultivates faith towards the teachings of the Buddha on things that to us are extremely hidden is called inference based on belief or inference based on faith. And the reason that is given for proving that something is an accurate teaching when the content of that teaching is extremely hidden, if you remember, is that when it is free of the 3 faults. So a teaching that is free of 3 errors, we say, is the reason that is given to prove the content of teachings that is extremely hidden to be accurate or valid.
So now that Java Sumi Tabi Lung Keshe, that's all some of Dansadi Java Sumi Nani, Java Nibati, Java Nibas, Jungsu Goju, Jungsu Goju Net and was a dish. That Jungsu Goju Net in our career is Lana, that the Zo Gordenda, Lamdenda. 다 대권하니 대조상마 조조의 차트기요. 뒤에도 중된디기 대조 차상 마송샤바 대양 당기 라고 나신 시지 대 말라바시 디 랍샤마 뚠마 나신 대라 미 리빈데 보메바디 대라 가서 모두 리비 제바치야 요바 인디 디 모두 리비 제바치인디 대라 리비 치면데 보메바디 조비운디 아니 소대 딜라 리빈데 보메바디 두 스토비운디 아니 마란소 신도 고유네 차데바 좀네 숭샤바디 맞아 이시 소리 이시체 토레스 와 딘디스치 켈링이
So the way that we say that it is acceptable or we can accept it is when we say it is, how do we say it? That it's free of the three reasonings.
free of three contradictions.
Three or three contradictions, right, yeah. So the reason that we give is it is a text or it is a teaching that is free of the three contradictions. Or, yeah, then what we're saying is, of these three, the most important one here, or the most relevant one is the second one, which means it's free of contradictions regarding slightly hidden phenomena. So if the text that we are analyzing, where the Buddha is teaching certain things that to us are extremely hidden, the reason why we have faith in it is because the teachings of the Buddha are free of contradictions regarding slightly hidden phenomena, which is essentially liberation and the path to attain liberation. And so after one has to be able to prove that this teaching is reliable, it's fundamental to already have established that the teachings of the Buddha in relation to liberation and the path to attain liberation are valid, or that there are no contradictions over there. So having realized that the teachings of the Buddha are valid with respect to liberation and cessation, which are slightly hidden phenomena, then we come to conclude that if the main part of the teaching that the Buddha taught, which was the path to attain liberation, and what liberation is, was not contradictory, and we can prove that that is valid, then the Buddha's other parts of the teaching also would not be wrong. And so when the Buddha says, this is the cause of suffering, this is suffering, we have faith in the fact that the Buddha is identifying other states for us that are extremely hidden to be accurate descriptions of them, because the Buddha, with respect to the primary content of the teachings, which is liberation and the path to liberation, was accurate. But there was no contradiction with that part of the teaching. Therefore, even this one is considered accurate. And that's how we come to have faith in the other aspects of the teaching of the Buddha.
Sonzata, leda nyimongi, shewanjingi pungodi, dunge dembare sumba nashin, saje thamdi dunge wa sumba nashin, di yimba di saje leda nyimongi, karaso wa shewanjingi pungodi, dunge demba yimba di nga mudori kuchugurwa.
So, proving that aggregates that are that arise, that are powered by karma and afflictions, just that much, or alternatively, that's the way it's said commonly, which is all contaminated things are suffering, or all contaminated phenomena are the nature of suffering, which means aggregates that arise through the power of karma and afflictions are suffering. This much we prove to inference, derived from the power of fact. It's not inference to belief, that's inference to the power of fact.
Ta dijela chumdendegi leda nyimongi shawanjingi pungodi dunge yimba sheba di ngadu mudori bichuktuwa na mudori bichuktukurwa. Di yindu ta dijela chumdendegi dindegi pungodi ma zugu zuyongdu ani tadagi susugi pungbo chibu gejan ma yimba. Dini debe pungbo, sugi pungbo, sugmegi pungbo, re ni zugu zuye dini dunge pungbo denba osu. Si geje she yongdu ta di sama leda nyimongi shawanjingi pungbo yimba di 하마고나 레드 니모시 샤와지기 풍부 있는 동네 덴바 이마 랍토고레데 이네 텐데디 레드 니모시 샤와지기 풍부 이고 소소 마시나 아니 그 풍부디 가레스라나 딩게 하고 마소 기지 레드 니모시 샤와지 이나 동네 덴바 이레 라보레스 기지 마이나 마레 라보레스 이나 레드 니모시 샤와지 미 니미시스라나 말리고 켐바도 참아서 소 좀nen디기 디마라와치 레레레니 코르베니 리투기 풍부 레레레니 두두체 dini dunga phagwe demba us lava yindi and malibu khyamba asikeje tshiyogota.
When we prove that aggregates that arise from karma and afflictions are suffering, we generally understand that if certain aggregates are produced by or arise from the power of karma and afflictions, they are suffering. But when the Buddha said, this is the truth of suffering, he didn't just point at some generic aggregates. He pointed at the ones that pertain to the form realm, to the desire realm, to the formless realm, with all the various detail that one finds in each one of these states. For us, for instance, if someone said, are your aggregates the nature of suffering? If you've understood that they are, then you can point at these and say, yes, these are. But if someone was to ask you, and what about those aggregates? You may say, if they arise through the power of karma and afflictions, they are the nature of suffering. But I don't know whether they have arisen from that or not. What we're essentially saying is we know that were it to arise through the power of karma and afflictions, it is the nature of suffering. I am unable to say that that is suffering or not because I can't tell whether that has arisen through the power of karma and afflictions or not. Instead of speaking of it like that, when the Buddha says, this is the truth of suffering, he doesn't just speak about the aggregates and generally says, this aggregate that belongs to the form realm is the truth of suffering. This aggregate in the desire realm is the truth of suffering. This aggregate that is in the formless realm is the truth of suffering. And individually pointing at each one and saying, this is the truth of suffering, and this has the causes of suffering, means that the Buddha has not generally understood, but has detailed understanding of each one. Were he not able to do this, then you would say he doesn't have complete realization of the truth of suffering. He has a realization of it, but not a complete realization. Unlike that, the Buddha has a complete realization because he identifies each individual state, pointing at it and saying, look, this is also the truth of suffering, this is also the truth of suffering. And by doing that, you establish that his realization is not just stable, but it's complete in terms of his understanding of the truth of suffering and the causes.
Oh yeah, that maluba kemba does share. That namgyungazo maluba kemba keje share yundu kode ocean ji kar share gislana. And maluba kemba tukures karjanana chumdendege and nyundi tangi lag machine nyundi sampanga mayimba che nyamdo ta shidibs la guru to do machine shidib ming ta guru to do machine mishibi mombas la guru bada oda 강달 양 먼저 시자 차상 캠모도 와 디버지 요래 디 바자다 한다 녀모도 디 바자다 제가 빵바 인디 시자 캠발 가연 두기요 말에 디 인디 시자 상마 캠도고 요래 딘디기 차네 또 샤저 두베기 캠바디 캠바 말루베 캠바레스 남주 망시와 샤바 딘디 튠디 그래.
Normally, the one that is most commonly given as an explanation of why the Buddha's mind is, I think we use the word very commonly, it is omniscient, or it is complete, the realization is a complete realization of all aspects. What we generally do is we speak of two kinds of obscurations. And just so that you're familiar with the terminology, in this school we don't speak of cognitive obscurations, they are called non-afflicted obscuration. So we generally divide obscurations of two kinds. There are afflictive obscurations and non-afflictive obscurations. Later, when you're doing like Chittamatra or other traditions, the word that they use for the non-afflictive obscurations, they call them obscurations to knowledge or cognitive obscurations. Here, the term that's used for them is non-afflicted obscurations. Whatever word might be used, the general explanation that you come across for why the Buddha has complete realization is that a Buddha has removed both afflictive obscurations and non-afflictive obscurations. And so we say the Buddha has complete realization because he has removed non-afflictive obscurations. This is the more common presentation that you would have come across, or that is most commonly given to explain why the Buddha has, the realization of the Buddha is a complete realization.
Then namgyu maluba kembala, chitang maluba kembala dishe dus gyamna mandiwa kaya yo mare. Redi ina yang tanda dela kariku gorsedu denshi sumbi kyoba yibi chane. Denshi nilu chinchi maluba sumbi chane maluba kemba dugorwa. Maluba kemba dugugu yoba yindi ani dembashi la fa soso cheche. Lamdin sumbi chane tekona ni kemba, godin sumbi chane tekona ni kemba temba, dugu ni sumbi chane maluba kemba sachi dus Dinshi sumbe chane kemba sumbe di kandis dugu yume di namji shunga ma sew je mido sumbi mido di indu da di paje sarba indu sura wajir ngi da yosi barda ya shamba sungen de yosi bar ngi hamigo ene mara je ma so da bod shunga je ma so so za da dinshi sumbe chane kemba sumbe yusi dugu di deshin she go sa re stinga samli yurda di go bar.
So there's nothing really wrong with saying that the Buddha knows or has complete realization because he has removed these obscurations, because that is generally the more commonly, that's how it is explained. But over here, why we're doing it like this is because what we're trying to prove here is we're trying to use the fact that the Buddha is a protector in the sense that he protects by unmistakably teaching the Four Truths as proof for the fact that the Buddha has this complete has a realization of reality, has a stable realization, and has a complete realization. So using the Four Truths, or the fact that the Buddha has realized the Four Truths, as evidence to tie it in with the fact that the Buddha has these three, has his realization, has these three qualities, is what one is trying to do over here. And so the explanation that is here, I haven't really come across it in this way, but this way of talking about his realization is a realization of reality because of his having spoken of the truth of the path in the way that he did, his realization being stable by having spoken of the truth of cessation, and his realization being complete because of having spoken of the truth of suffering and its causes, as three ways to prove these three aspects of the realization of the Buddha, is something that I haven't really seen anywhere, but I think it fits very well. I think it fits very well here, because what we're trying to do is use the realization of the Four Truths of the Buddha and use that to prove that the Buddha's realization has these three qualities. And so instead of just saying it is a complete realization because it has removed the affliction, what part of his realization of the Four Truths suggests that he has this is how we're trying to connect it. So the way that you find it presented here is with that purpose of trying to connect these two.
Oh yeah. I kebar sumbo te rimba shindo chiroba da pagoloba da miloba nyaran rajoba tagi tobale rimba shindo haba yino.
So these three qualities are respectively superior to the realization of outsiders, learners, and no more learners that are Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha arhats.
Da tangbo Pemba shajo tubo tujugi tekona ni tujugi kemba di tekona ni kingi yo sonza chirubi kemba di kemba to power is la chirubi gyula dame kemba di yo mare tekona ni kemba mindus di chirubi kemba di kemba to power this will be your.
The first one, which is it is a realization of reality, is distinguishing it from the realization of outsiders being people who don't have realization of selflessness. So because the Buddha has a realization of reality, he has a realization of reality or of selflessness, it is superior to the realization of other people who have not realized selflessness. So the first one, which is realization of reality, distinguishes it from the realization of those who have not understood selflessness. So when we say outsiders here, we're referring to non-Buddhist traditions.
Oh yeah. Da kemba niba digi ani nyeram pago loba pago le kebal pago dingi yor.
The second one, which is stable realization, distinguishes it from learners, and learners are known as the Aryas who are still on the path of learning. So we haven't taken the path of normal learning, but the Aryas that are learners over here. It's distinguishing his realization from theirs.
Da kemba keju sumba digi tumba shajo dubu tuju kemba di ani nyeram rajomba ki toba le kebal pago dingi yor.
And the third one, which is complete, is distinguishing it from the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha arhats who are no more learners. So Pratyeka Buddha and Shravaka arhats, this third aspect of complete realization is showing how it is superior even to the realization of Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha arhats.
So da nyeram rajomba la kedi keje chiba ina nyeram rajomba kobang top dingi rajomba kobang top dingi nyeram tindi chila kedi keje chiba ina ni tandangi 풍부len shaba di dunge de maresha di phenji gi ledi khandi resha skeje tiba ina ta di phenji gi ledi chidam nimo wa ge sajo yimba chig re ba ma do ani phenji gi ledi dindi sa sha tuzu dindi jig la sa sha legi no sa tan de dindi jig sa sha se keje khan she tu yo.
So if an arahat is asked, if like we were to ask an arahat and say, what was the causes that I have done that have led to this state? An arahat will be able to say generally that there are certain propelling causes, karma or certain propelling karma that has led to this state, but the detail of what it was, when it was done, how it was done, with all of that detail is something an arahat is unable to know and therefore unable to explain.
So ta tanda sadang legi kheba di maung ba kewa khandi ji lingi res la ba ina ta di le di nimong shang ji ji yimba yindu le di wang ki khwa ki gi res la ji ma do dindi ji ki gi res yana ngesong la ki gi la ma do ngesong na ni dil ki sa nyawal ki gi idal ki gi res ne ko misu ga ji la tu yo ma.
Similarly, if one was to ask the actions that I do now, like the present actions, what kind of result will they give? An arhat might be able to give general explanations like, because it is karma and it is afflicted, it will give rise to a state of samsara, or if it is negative karma, it will give rise to an unfortunate birth, so it might give state to a lower birth. But with the detail of saying it is going to give rise to this kind of birth with these kind of features and this kind of situation, for instance, it's a propelling cause for an animal state or for a hungry ghost state or for a hell state. That detail an arahat is unable to grasp.
So that no ba sheje to be gi ta nizu shira ba re gi ani gyu le khandi ji mi ngo khandi ji me sa bi tu khandi ji me an tigi jibu tanda kharchin mi gi me tanda ba ma mi ba tuzu khandi ji ko yo me ta dinde cha sang da di tembe song gi ta.
So the Buddha, on the other hand, you find explanations where he says, this kind of karma was accumulated at such and such a moment, in such and such a way, with such and such an intention, in such and such a place, and then this has the power to give rise to such a result in such a moment, in such a state, with a lot more detail, and then you find repeatedly that the Buddha describes things with this kind of detail and depth.
Penna lu yu na lo la paje di kyabo ma ge da yisa yu da ji gi tene shagi gi ri yu di same ta ye che shagi mi shu se ba ti se yong de ta shagi mi di shu nyang wa sim se de che gi dung yang ge yo ba yin de ta da jo ma de du same ge ha ko go ro ta le ni ba sa sha ta dung yong de shagi ri du le ni ba ji sa yo ta di le di ti mi ba de sam shin ma to le karisa imeda kandesa yume kejishi tugo mawa ani chumnendeli akadi shuile ani chumnendeli lu yuso tanda dungi nyongdingi di sama tuzu kandi tewa kandi chiglo konazo nyamdu tsoche le kandesa yume digi namidi ta tanda dismingi yo to shiji sama dishi yo.
You find in the sutras there's these explanations. For instance, there's one episode where one king kills a lot of people who belong to this Shakya clan. And so when he's killing them and they're all suffering as a kind of a race or like a group, a clan, then the arhats who are present, they know that this is a result of something that the Shakyas have done, and so they're experiencing the result of some negative karma that they must have accumulated, but that's about all they know. And so when they ask the Buddha why this is happening, then the Buddha in the sutra he says, them as a group at some point at this and this place, they were in such and such a state and they did such and such a thing which has now resulted to them all together in this moment having experienced it. So he gives a lot more detail to the general presentation of having done something negative and therefore experiencing the result.
Shundindigi Donald Sushi Nandalu Gudus Jeda. Pena Midi Chundindela, Sunyam Pyu Yunde, and Jumne de Sunyam Pusha, Kiran Digi Pusha, you gave a digi, Chita gave a lady saw your Yunde, Jibu de watch the Mingrba, Tesam Shimata Yamar, Sanji Misukachi, Korean Sungudu, Tindi Pyu give it our digi, Kiran Gawa the Digitella, Kiran Hala Tigris, Gawa the Moguji Jella, Kiran the Digi to Smingris, Coordination Masuna, Lujuma Wushai.
If you read the sutras, you'll find many such narratives or many such occasions where people offer alms or something to the Buddha when the Buddha goes for alms and they give alms to the Buddha. And the fact that it is a virtuous action will give rise to a resultant happiness or a resultant state of well-being. That is something that we can also prove. But the Buddha goes one step further and he says, the virtue that you have accumulated through this action will lead in such and such a life to be born in a God realm or in the state of extreme luxury, or the state that what you have done right now will lead to this kind of result in that state, in that life. And so if you read the sutras, you find on many occasions the Buddha gives incredibly detailed answers to, or descriptions of how certain actions will mature at what point, in what moment, with what kind of result.
So that Jumne de Mambo Sunga Yoga, you do Nandana Chia Yoganashi, the Lugimo, the Sungi Yoga you do, and Tea Negaki, Yan Chirube, Dumba, Transson Kashi Jig, the Nebet, that Jumne de Milo Gortangitus, but Mil's money and initiating to Lamani Gabola complaint here.
Again, in the sutras, you find that when the Buddha is going around giving these kind of very outlandish sounding descriptions, some non-Buddhist people who get a little upset, they're like, Buddha's going around fooling people and misleading people and lying to them, and they come together and they go to the king to complain about what the Buddha is doing.
So that tea nega paje, Gabo Koraya, Dumbagi, Loma Chaya Mari, Jinju Cha Meva Indu, and Gabo Koraya Tesson to Sache. And that Konzogi complaint le Gabo Koraya Tesson to Sadi Shedu, and that Konzo Sama Trudu Shade, that and that Dumba Sangi Shedu to the Lave, money in the May, Samos was. And it is called Zumay Batang on Hakurista. And Miss Zumay Hakana, and Korakorasta, Jagato Gurwa, Tokulu the Dishkeja, and Konzo the Che do. Because Shashi things and Sangil the line, Sangi challenge the exception.
When they went and complained to the king, at the time the king also was not a student of the Buddha. And so they all kind of came together and they said, okay, let's try and figure out a way to see whether what the Buddha is saying is true or not. And if it's not true, I guess the intention that they had was, if we can prove that the Buddha is lying or the Buddha is making things up, then that brings, I guess, power in our favor. And so they try and come up with a way, with a plan, to see if what Shakyamuni Buddha is saying is true or not.
So that was a Karichevre, Zending Dongo, and Dongo Perva Karikari Yimban, the Imdi Dongo, Amgi Dongo Hava, Dimeta, Tigi Tella, the new religion, Luwal Konasu Ming Chinsha, the Deshin Tisha, Tini Shingana Yorashinga, the Shingana Lolabena, Tashiki Shinga, Duke Shinga's Miri Kaga Yoro, what Shinga Susus on the day, on the Bonsus look, Minkaga tea on the shop. Dana Jipu Chushima on the shop, or those Ponsus Yoro dishes, and Jumdin de la Jumdin de la when she so much for the tagging and shade of one. And share the Jumdin de religion and descending Tellari, the armed woman Tellari, the and Kim's on Dick J. She got there, Dickens on some of the song. So
when they decide to test whether what the Buddha is saying is right or not, then at that point the Buddha accepts their challenge. And so what they do is, they take wood from different kinds of trees, like a mango wood or imli, tamarind tree wood, whatever, different kinds of trees. And they burn the wood, and they take the ashes and put them in little bowls. And under the bowls they write the name, but they put the bowls facing up. Then another thing that they also put in front of the Buddha is they take like fields of different families, different people. They bring the rice that was grown in the fields of different people, and they put that in bowls, and they write at the bottom the name of each, like the name of the person whose field that's coming from. And then they also bring a lot of children from different households, and they put all of these in front of the Buddha, and they say, okay, so if you really are able to know things, then tell us what tree, this is the ash of what tree, whose field does this rice come from, and which family does this child belong to. And at that point, the Buddha he describes each thing accurately, and the king kind of getting stunned. He develops faith for the Buddha, and then in that story, the king then starts to follow the Buddha as a result of this episode.
dire ta dando luju yam semba ji karayursana yam semba sogore luju ji karayursana 파고 몽겔 기들이 고랑게 아말 공부서 다 아말 공부서 요데 다 아마 개발된 거봐 개발된 게 다그 체딜라 아마 다 간다 덴바통 살 거트요 말봐 다 아마 시페르디 다 가와게 요나 아마 가와게 요나 계서 아마도 가와게 하거나 다연디 출을 티기 다 베진 랑가시 좀 로바치 제고 삼체 아니 몽게불은 무시해요 무시기 됐대요. 무시기 때 가와 가서 무시기 됐대. 그럼 아마 가와 개발 못 맞고 통마도다 무시기.
There's another strange kind of story that's narrated where Munkaliana, who was one of the Buddha's disciples, his mother dies, and before his mother dies, he's not able to make her realize selflessness. So we say that he's not able to take her to the state of seeing the truth, which basically means to the state of becoming an Arya, the path of seeing. So he's unable to take her to the path of seeing, or unable to make her see the truth. Is that okay what I mean? And in not being able to do that, Mudgayana was also known to have clairvoyant abilities. And so when his mother passes away, trying to see where she's gone so he can then make her ensure that she can be taken or steered to directly realize selflessness, he starts looking around or starts to through his clairvoyant abilities, he starts to look around, but he can't figure out where she is.
So that the matter kabla ani tumshari to book do change. Tangi ami kewa kawale wadi 통동민도 가와게 요나스 세인데 니 덤베게 키라마 아니 잠링 디나 깨월리면도 잠링 링 디네 배 쇼 가와이 타르고 쇼지기 디네 링 디리지라 아니 깨월레샤스 세제 아니 좀니 코랑 람되나제 아니 몽게 파게치 코랑 아마 깨월레서 디레 아마디 투 아니 디나 최시에 디리시 아니 수로로기
When Mongoliana is unable to find out where his mother is, then he goes to the Buddha and he asks the Buddha and he says, I can't figure out where she is. And the Buddha says, your mother, she's not born in this land, in this realm. She's in some very distant land actually, in a very distant land where she is and she's not around here, that's why you can't find her. And so then the Buddha gives him some instructions or tells him how to get there and what to do when he sees her. And so then in that sutra you find that Mudgayana, when he actually leaves, he goes there, he finds her, he instructs her, his mother is able to, this next life of his mother, she is able to attain the state of an Arya being, and then Mudgayana comes back to the Buddha. That's also one episode that's narrated in the sutras.
Oda digi milobe yara dajoto togole habore se dijita.
So that's what here this is what being superior to that of normal learners, it's referring to that ability that the Buddha had.
Deshe. Ta di hari tubares na ngazo deshi tu sabarda. Kizu sumle deshi tu simare.
So this one, after I finish this is the proof that's given to show or to prove Sugata, the aspect of Sugata.
Ta sumba deshi litombo tu su niyes.
Do you have the next one also? Yeah.
Sawa shinjin kinjur teten baas.
From Sugata teacher, engaged in realizing the needs of others, he is the teacher.
Ta deba deba shagya tuba chujins. Shinjin do dame to be sheragi deba te undu songa yinde kebar sumdingi kembango kansa yemi yeshers.
Deba you said someone teacher. Take Shakyamuni Buddha or the teacher. He has previously cultivated the wisdom realizing selflessness for the needs of others because he is a being who possesses realization that has the three qualities.
다 단다디 가리를 대시기 따랬어. 다 따라 가리고 오래 대시고 와. 따라 대시고 오디 아니 케버 숨딩기 캠퍼스도 또버듯이 케버 숨딩기 캠퍼가에 강사 임베시스. 그래서 따라 또버듯이 귤응가에 강사 임베시 따디시. 다 케버 숨딩기 또버듯이 요나 데네 강사디 가리고 그랬으나 아니 남에도 비시럽 다 단다디 덤봉도 송와세 덤바디 남에도 비시럽을 쓰기요래 강사를 쓰기요 말에 덤바디 다다디 덤바디 남에도 비시럽 아니 우도 송와디 랍토그레스.
When you're using Sugata to prove teacher, your reason is Sugata. The sign that you're giving is Sugata. And so, because he is a being who possesses realization, Sugata here refers to realization with the three qualities, right? So he is a being who possesses realization that has the three qualities. He is a being that possesses that realization that has gone beyond that has the three qualities. It's the same as saying Sugata. With this reason, what you're trying to prove is that he is a teacher. Now also please keep in mind that teacher over here does not refer to the person, but the word teacher, the name teacher is being used to refer to wisdom that directly realizes selflessness. It's not a teacher as in a person. Okay? The teacher that is being spoken of in these aspects is the direct realization of selflessness. And so what we're proving is because the Buddha has this realization that has the three qualities, it had to have been preceded by wisdom realizing selflessness.
디데도와 다음에 대고는 이 캠바 세디 다음에 무슨도 캠바 가는 게 지시해서 캠바 템바 세디 다음에 무슨도 캠바 가는 게 지시해서 말루베 캠바 세디 안 다음에 무슨 또 신배 가는 말루베 캠바 게 지시해요. 소자 다 디상마 다음에 무슨 또 가는 게 지시해요. 와 디인도다 딘디기 대화시하고 키주시에요디 가서 똑같이 키주디 시에요디 딘디지 용하나 당고 고주사기 남의 무슨 도가지 뭐 들어보고 뒤면은 그 규샤도 뭐와 당고 남의 무슨 도가지 매나 디림기 공부하니 다절로 공부도 집에 냥대모도 집에 캠바 땜바세니 용거 말와 냥대모 뉴디방비 냥대모도 마체나 디니 림기 공부도 송하는 때네 시디방비 말루비 캠바세디 용거 말와 그래서 디상마 용하나 당고 남의 무슨도 캠바 뭐도 들어보고 요디 두그르와 캐바디 렐라우시 두도 와가지고 디인디 아니 덤바샤주도 거치진 신들도 덤바 다음에 신들도 덤바 다음에 좀 싫어게 덤바 등도 송아 인디 캐바스니 캐망을 가서 이미지 세디래.
How this works is because if you look at what Sugata means, whether you're talking about a realization of reality, or you're talking about a stable realization, or you're talking about complete realization, the realization of reality has a connotation of realizing selflessness. The connotation of it being stable is that it is a realization that has... the first one is the connotation of it being a direct realization. The second one of it being stable, it is an uninterrupted direct realization. The third one of it being complete is while being a direct realization of selflessness, it also has the quality of being able to know all the various aspects of the truth of suffering it causes. And so because the meaning of Sugata itself is three different ways of understanding the direct realization of selflessness that the Buddha has and how it is characterized and has these other qualities that add to it being just a realization of reality by seeing how it is stable and complete. For the Buddha to have such a quality, it's obvious that earlier at some point there had to be a first moment when he generated this direct realization of selflessness. And so the provision is very easy, because if the Buddha has a realization of that is characterized as with these three qualities, it follows it had to be preceded by a direct realization of selflessness. So the provision, which is, if he is a being who possesses realization and these three qualities, it's easy to show how it follows that he necessarily previously had to have cultivated the wisdom realizing selflessness for the needs of others.
Teacher, ta kolla wa cheba ina maluba kembas na namkin ge jishi. Kemba tembas laba ina ani nyangde ngo de shi kemba de shi jishi. 그래서 So that the indi da maluba kemba sla indi maluba kemba dube gyu karire dame to bishera. Nyangde ngodo chibi tekona ni kemba temba se di kemba duji gyu karire dame kemba dre. Diniga gi tumungi gyudi karire. Niga gi tumungi gyudi tekona ni kemba dre ta. Beso. Ta tekona ni kemba di rangden du gomna tarbi gyure. Nyangde ngodo chibi tekona ni kemba temba se chawo. 딘디디 딘디 대고는 얘기면 캠바디 신된도 공부이나 아니 타바섬 많이 봐 남킹 규를 두고 요가 인데 말루비키 캠비 규를 두고 요 소자 다 단계 대시셰베 가도는 좀는데 말루비 캠바디 두베 인데 아니 디기 규텔라 질 대고는 캠바 고고 요바디 가르스 투무 규래 다 대고는 캠바 요가 도는 마세 딘디기 대고는 캠비 똥바 태양 신된도 공부지 임바디 다디 두고 가 신된도 디 마고나 maluba kema namgin dugu meba indi ani jorwe chwe namola duji chwe namola shendyen do dame do beshara temba do mondo sonde es odi labit presented.
So when you see this reason that you have, he has previously cultivated the wisdom realizing selflessness. There's an addition over here which is for the needs of others, right? For the well-being of others, you can say. What this means, or what this addition is showing is, again, when you come and look at the three aspects of the realization of the Buddha, the one that it is, the aspect of it being complete is unique to Buddhas because it is distinct from people who have merely attained liberation. The aspect of it being stable is referring to the fact that he has attained complete cessation of suffering. What is common to both of these? So what is common to the realization that is stable and to the realization that is complete is a realization of reality. So that realization of reality, which is a realization of selflessness, is a cause that is common both for having a stable realization and then eventually having a complete realization. With the addition of the third aspect of the Buddha's realization, which is complete realization, apart from proving that it had to be preceded by a realization of reality, what is being added here is this realization of reality was cultivated not for oneself but for the sake of others. And how you understand this is, the realization of reality by itself is a cause that is common both to stable realization and complete realization. Because if one cultivates selflessness for oneself, then one attains liberation, which is stable realization. But this same cause of realizing reality, when it is done not for oneself but for the purpose of others, it becomes the cause for attaining Buddhahood, not just liberation. And the fact that the realization of the Buddha is not just stable but it is complete suggests that at the time of cultivating selflessness, it wasn't done for oneself, because had that been the case, it would have not led to complete but only stable realization. But because the Buddha has the quality of complete realization, this realization of reality was not done for himself or for oneself, but for the intention or for the purpose of others. So that's why in the predicate you find cultivated the wisdom realizing selflessness for others.
Sonzata sangi koranya ngar tholam gi kaso dame gombare dame gombo to sonre dajomba tenya ngar tholam gi kaso dame gombo to sonre niga chigo chaso 다 다좀바 균지도 기부 톨람바데 담에 공기요. 디 담에디 산지기 살 티모토야. 타바마도 티모토야디 딘디 담에도 비셔라텔라 신된도 담에도 비셔라 콤바디 매바 손자 닝지기 지심바디 매바 인디 신된도 세기 디 창주기 셈 지심바디 매바 인디 아니 크기 담에도 비셔라디 디부 다좀바도 게 디니 다 야티투요 와. 다 넘바샤죠 뭐 코란다 균지도 주베 창주세바 통람바 되게 담에 고미요 딘데 담에디 신된도 공부 손상 창주심이 지심바 인디 디기 아니 가와티도르스라나 타바좀 모임버시지 여기 멀리고 키면 남행이 보기 치치 말과 디인도 다 단다 좀 된데 두개로 멀리고 키면 여바 디기 좀 된데 코란 거 담에 떠봐서 담에 무슨 또 병원도 손아서도 마세 딘디디야 신된도 공부하고 신된도 공부하고도 손아 임바티 또 도스트도다.
So the Buddha, when he was on the path of seeing, he also cultivated a direct realization of selflessness. When an arhat was on the path of seeing, they also cultivated a direct realization of selflessness. That much is common to both. But that direct realization of selflessness that was cultivated on the path of seeing and then later on the path of meditation by an arhat was unable to lead that mind to attain a state of Buddhahood, because while they were meditating or cultivating a wisdom that directly realized selflessness, it was not done with the intention of other people in mind. It was done for one's own purposes. And so when that direct realization of selflessness is not kind of empowered or strengthened with the wish to benefit others, that same direct realization of that selflessness, it can lead till, or it has like this ability to lead one to liberation, but from then onwards, that realization of selflessness is not steered any further. If, on the other hand, at the time of the path of seeing and at the path of meditation, there is the same wisdom realizing selflessness directly, but it is kind of it is strengthened by the wish to benefit others, that same mind is steered not only to liberation but also beyond. And where it reaches is that it starts to not just have a stable realization or an uninterrupted realization of selflessness, but while it is realizing selflessness, it has the ability to also start perceiving and start seeing and knowing all other aspects. So the fact that the Buddha has complete realization of all aspects is then evidence of the fact that the cultivation of the direct realization of selflessness at the time of the path was not just cultivated individually or exclusively, but it was done with the expressed intention of benefiting others, which is then what kind of empowered it or strengthened it to be able to steer to a result that is not just liberation or a state of arhat, but to a complete realization. So that's how we prove the pervasion.
다 가장 공당가도 바게 풍부도 된 삼로당에 걸어발랭요 걸어발라도 이중께다 안타발라 되니길로 아니 디젤라 다음에 또 비셔럽 또 가장가서 계제셔서 또 계제셔서 디나로라 신전도 공부해서 계제 대화체 계제셔 제중마서 디다 가장가서 계제셔는 신도 제제 또 신수수의 공리 침바이나 디기 딱 한다 타발 티엠도 산지에서 자원이 치도요 디하고.
So one thing that all of us should also be very acutely aware of is, or the whole thing that we did last night of how to cultivate the four truths was done without bringing in any element of concern or doing it for anyone other than oneself. And that entire path that we discussed, when it's cultivated, it's also important for us to know that all of that path, where it can lead to is liberation. But as it is, discussed as it is, it has no ability whatsoever to lead towards Buddhahood. That's something that we should be aware of.
다 개대 맞으면 타바자마이 산지 고건 토바지 되기도 라바이나 곰자디 가상 계제시에 다가나지. 곰자 대가나 임바텔라 이내야 디 곰용디 텔 신지디 가르고래 신된도 세디고래. 딜레소나 아니 신이 산지 사이 산지 남지 토베 귤두고래. 디 마시나 남지 토베 귤두고.
If one's goal is not just liberation but to attain Buddhahood, then the thing to be cultivated is still what we discussed yesterday. It's the same. What is different is the motivating factor that accompanies that entire path or that entire practice. And that motivating factor is for others. So one does all the same things, but the motivation behind doing them changes. And when one does it for the sake of others, then that same path that one cultivates has the ability, unlike when it is cultivated without that intention for others, to move or direct that path towards Buddhahood or attaining Buddhahood.
다 신륜도 Tendegi denshi mitas chudu gombe lo de kebala shindun do gombala ani kare gugurela na ningje zawa chini ke dinegi chanju sembe ko dimena shindun do gomba di ngumar.
For that, for the sake of others, just these words, for that to have meaning, what it means is, or what it explains is that for this path to be cultivated, for the purpose of others, what is indispensable is that one cultivates great compassion, that is the result of having cultivated loving kindness. So without loving kindness that leads to great compassion, this for others is impossible.
Ningje zawa chini chanju sembe.
So okay, yeah.
Ningje zawa chini
What
ke
do we
dinegi.
say great compassion? What is great compassion? No, that is not right. What is great compassion in English?
Great compassion.
Is it bodhicitta?
No.
Is it the cause of bodhicitta?
Yeah.
Okay, then great compassion that causes bodhicitta.
So that di indi ta chanju sem di masina shindun no gomba se de leme ta che so di chanju sem di singo wa.
So that for others is bodhicitta motivated by great compassion. So you got the words wrong. Yeah. Without bodhicitta that is motivated by great compassion, there's no way for this for others part to become the motivating factor for whatever one cultivates.
Di indi ta maluba kemba se maluba kembe gyu khare de so na kazang go doji gyu chaba je khare de ke je shaba na shi maluba kemba se namjin doji gyu chaba je de khare de na chanju sem.
So if you are trying to identify what the indispensable cause for complete realization is, that discussion when earlier we were trying to figure out or understand what indispensable causes are, the cause that is indispensable for complete realization, that indispensable cause is bodhicitta.
So that di gyumje den she jerum ji langzo na so la lo la nge jun de ya namda semje ki simba me na lame chanju ki puzo dewe gyuru mi gyuru be lo de na ki chanju semjo ki es ko so.
If you remember or you haven't heard, there's that verse in the three principal aspects of the path where Lama Tsongkhapa says, even if you have cultivated renunciation, unless it is accompanied with the pure motivation, it does not become a cause for Buddhahood, therefore the wise cultivate bodhicitta.
Chasoma, oda tere. Ta dendegi, ta chanju sem ke dang dang, ta chanju namgen topa la chanju sem di gugu yoba yundu, ta chanju sem ke dang dang, di kanti sin di du gugu yome, du lu du dang dang, digi namsha di, ta nganzo lo jime lop zen nang, digi tuwa nganzo lo rin kami lop zen.
The whole presentation of how bodhicitta is cultivated and then how bodhicitta acts as a cause that leads to attain Buddhahood is what is part of our next year's subject matter.
Otere. So ta di indi tanda de dreba namlo la, de le temba dutsu ni lamgi negab su malubu kemba da jawa maze na, dribu go su malubu kemba midrubi cheras.
The way this establishes, so maybe we should just put being teacher out. The way this establishes teacher, because teacher is not referring to person anymore. The way this establishes teacher is because without having engaged in a complete realization at the time of the path, he would not have a complete realization at the time of his result.
Ta shiba temba le tsewa dutsu ni is.
From teacher compassion.
Tsawa, te le tseyin shendun ngor, tundru tseba midur shir.
From that is compassion, because he does not neglect engaging in deeds for the benefit of others.
Tele tsewa ngundu suwa chuba yinde, temba sheja tuba chujin she. Tele tseyin sladu, tele seyadi karere, tanda shendun du temba dame tubi shera gomba ngundu suwa tigi tele, ane tigi ngundu tsewa ngundu suwa chubire sundu tele tseyin. Tele tsewa ngundu suwa chuba yinsi. Ta kwe yundu kandu go gore, temba sheja tuba chujin, tangbo gozu sadi tsewa niji shimbore, te yundu temba sheja tuba chujin, tsewa niji shimbo ngundu suwa yinde, lamgi negab su shendun du dame musum tu kibi joro komba tsebi yeshis.
From that refers to teacher. And so from teacher, we're proving compassion. What this says is from that, from that referring to teacher, being preceded by compassion is established because how? Take Shakyamuni Buddha, he has previously cultivated great compassion because when on the path he engaged in familiarizing with the wisdom directly realizing selflessness from the others.
So that dus keresha shi lam dibu shi dibu kap kharidu maluba khemba. Dibu kap maluba khemba yoba yindi digi kharib prup tendu gure lam gi kap so maluba khembi cherdo dame gumgi yoba di tuktu gurwa. Ta lam gi kap so ani shengi tendu maluba khemba gumgi kasa shengi tendu maluba khemba ngodi shegi cherdo dame gumgi yoba di tubi yongdu digi khari tuktu gure shi ne kap so tako gozugri la ani sinjelo tsewa yoba di tuktu gurwa.
So through the complete realization, you can prove that at the time of the result, there is complete realization. Through the time of the result being complete realization, you can prove that at the time of the path, there was the cultivation of complete realization. Or that was the aim that was being cultivated, which was not just a realization, but a complete realization. So you can prove that there was a wisdom directly realizing selflessness, not just for oneself, but for others, which was then the intention to cultivate or generate or attain complete realization. And when you can prove that, you can prove that at the time, not during the path, but at the onset, before even starting out, the intention that the Buddha had before setting out on the path, at the time of the base or at the time of the cause, was also with the intention of benefiting others. So with complete realization, you can show that at the time of the result, there is this. At the time of the cause, this was being cultivated. And at the time of the path, this was being cultivated. And at the very beginning, there was also the aspect of great compassion, or Buddhist that was required to lead it to that result.
Di ta kansa te kyoba yimba songzang deshi ngundu songwa tu. Deshi ngundu songzang tenpa dame shende nu tenpa dame komba ngundu songwa tu. Shende nu tenpa dame tenpa ngundu songzang di nguen la ani tsewa ngundu songwa tu. Odu dosre. Di indi jibu chima le gyunga mga ngundu songwa tu chuku yoba indi tila ludogu namsha asa.
So from teacher, you prove that there was Sugata. From Sugata, you prove that it was preceded by... from protector, you prove Sugata. From Sugata, you prove teacher, which is that it was preceded by the wisdom directly realizing selflessness for the purpose of others, for the benefit of others. From teacher, you prove that it was preceded by compassion. And so, from the resultant states, you prove that there was the previous state of Sugata. Before Sugata, there was teacher. Before teacher, there was compassion. And so, because you're going from the causes and you're proving the effects, that's why we call this that reverse process.